Johnny Depp had always been a fan of quiet, peaceful places. Far from the bright lights of Hollywood, he found comfort in the simple towns that seemed untouched by fame. Today, he was in a small, bustling town, blending in with the crowd as best as he could. A simple hat, glasses, and a plain jacket were all it took to stay unnoticed. He had mastered the art of going unnoticed when he wanted to. As he walked through the outdoor market, the scent of fresh bread and the sound of friendly chatter filled the air. Stalls with colorful fruits, handmade crafts, and local treats lined the streets. It was the kind of place where people smiled at one another, where life seemed to slow down, and Johnny could forget, even for a moment, about the world of flashing cameras and noisy crowds. But as he walked past a stall selling handmade jewelry, his attention was caught by a small figure standing alone by the fountain in the center of the square. It was a little girl, no older than 6. She was standing still, her small hands tightly clutching a stuffed bunny. Her wide eyes scanned the crowd frantically, as if searching for someone she didn't seem to find. Her clothes were simple, and there was no one with her. Johnny felt a pang in his chest as he noticed her face. Her expression was a mix of confusion and fear, and she didn't look like she belonged in the bustling market at all. He slowed his steps, watching her carefully, unsure of what to do next. Johnny stood at a distance, his eyes never leaving the little girl. She remained rooted by the fountain, glancing around every few seconds, as though waiting for someone to appear. He glanced around too, expecting to see an anxious parent or perhaps an older sibling rushing toward her. But the crowd moved along, oblivious, and no one seemed to notice the child standing there alone. Minutes passed, and Johnny's worry grew. The little girl didn't cry out for help, didn't wave to anyone she recognized. She simply stood there, clinging tightly to her stuffed bunny, her small shoulders hunched as though she was trying to make herself smaller, to blend into the surroundings. Johnny felt an overwhelming urge to help, though he wasn't sure why. There was something in her expression, the quiet fear in her eyes, that tugged at him. He felt a protective instinct rising within him, and his thoughts wandered to his own daughter, how she used to get lost in crowds when she was little, how she'd always look up at him with those wide eyes, trusting him to make everything right. This little girl reminded him of her, in a way he couldn't explain. As time passed and no one arrived, the little girl began to walk slowly, her gaze darting nervously from side to side. She was alone in the middle of a busy market, but instead of asking someone for help, she simply started walking, as if she knew where she was going. Johnny waited a moment longer, then decided to follow her. He moved cautiously, keeping a safe distance behind her. He blended into the crowd, using the cover of trees, parked cars, and busy shoppers to avoid being noticed. He didn't want to scare her by getting too close, nor did he want to attract attention to himself. The last thing he needed was someone recognizing him, but more than that, he wanted to make sure the girl was okay, to make sure she wasn't heading into danger. He quickened his pace just a bit, staying low and keeping a close watch, his heart racing with a quiet concern that only deepened the longer he followed. Johnny watched as the little girl approached a busy intersection. The cars zipped past, their engines roaring, but the girl didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for a crosswalk or for an adult to guide her. Instead, she darted between 2 cars, her small form barely visible against the rushing traffic. Johnny's heart skipped a beat. She was dangerously close to being hit, but somehow she made it across, unscathed. He took a deep breath and quickened his pace to catch up, his eyes never leaving her. She didn't seem to notice the danger. Instead, she kept walking with a strange sense of purpose, heading toward a part of town Johnny didn't recognize. It wasn't part of the market anymore. It was quieter, the streets more empty, and the buildings around her looked run down. The further she went, the more the atmosphere changed. The warm energy of the market was replaced by a darker, more unsettling silence. The little girl, though, walked with confidence, as if she knew exactly where she was going, but Johnny noticed something else, something that sent a chill down his spine. Every few steps, she glanced nervously over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the street behind her. She was looking for someone, or maybe trying to make sure no one was following her. Johnny felt a sense of unease settle deep in his stomach. He wasn't sure what it was, an instinct maybe, but something about the way she kept checking behind her didn't sit right. It wasn't the behavior of a child who was simply lost. She was aware of something that made her uncomfortable, and that awareness made Johnny's own pulse quicken. He continued to follow, staying a little farther back now, his eyes darting from the girl to the street around him. That's when he saw him, a man in a dark hoodie standing across the street. He was leaning against a building, his posture relaxed, but his eyes never left the girl. Johnny's gut tightened. The man was watching her too closely, too carefully. Johnny's concern grew, his mind racing. Why was this man staring at a little girl? Was he just another passerby, or was there something more to this? He had to be sure. Johnny slowed his steps, blending further into the shadows, making sure not to draw attention to himself as he continued to follow, his gaze shifting between the girl and the man across the street. Something was definitely off. The little girl turned off the main road and walked down an alley between two old, crumbling shops. Johnny hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. The alley was narrow, lined with dumpsters and discarded cardboard boxes, and the dim light barely reached the pavement. There were no people around, only the distant sounds of traffic. The deeper she went, the more isolated she seemed. Something about the alley made him uneasy, but Johnny couldn't stop himself. His concern for the girl overpowered the growing sense of danger. He quietly followed her, keeping his distance, careful to stay hidden in the shadows between the old buildings. His footsteps were soft, barely a whisper on the cracked pavement. The little girl came to a stop in front of a weathered back door of an abandoned building. She glanced around briefly, checking to see if anyone was watching, and then she knocked twice. There was no answer. She waited for a few seconds, then knocked again, this time more urgently. Johnny's breath hitched as he watched from behind a dumpster. Was she trying to reach someone? Was there someone in there she trusted? When no one answered, the little girl didn't hesitate. She walked around to the side of the building, where the broken remains of a door hung loosely on its hinges. It looked as though it had been kicked in, and the wood was splintered, the frame warped by time and neglect. Without a second thought, the girl pushed the door open, stepping inside with the same sense of purpose she had carried all along. Johnny stood still for a moment, weighing his options. His mind raced. He wanted to help, but he didn't know what he'd find inside. He could just call the police, but something told him that whatever was going on, it needed to be handled quietly, away from the eyes of others. His gut told him he had to follow, that the girl was in danger, and if he didn't do something now, it might be too late. With a deep breath, Johnny crept toward the door. He moved cautiously, making sure his steps were light. The air inside the building was cold and musty, the scent of decay hanging in the thick silence. He paused in the doorway for a moment, allowing his eyes to adjust to the darkness. The faint sound of muffled voices reached him, and his heart skipped a beat. Children's voices, low whispers. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the dim interior. The building seemed abandoned. No lights, no signs of life, just the remnants of old furniture and peeling wallpaper. He could hear the children now, their voices growing clearer, though still hushed, like they were trying to keep their presence a secret. Johnny moved silently, keeping close to the walls, his eyes straining to make out shapes in the shadows. He rounded a corner and came upon a small room in the back of the building, and that's when he saw it. A group of children huddled together, sitting on the floor in the dim light. They were wrapped in threadbare blankets, their faces pale and tired, their eyes wide with fear. The sight hit Johnny like a punch to the gut. These kids were scared, hiding from something or someone. He took another step forward, barely breathing, trying not to startle them, and then one of the children, an older boy, looked up. His eyes locked onto Johnny's, and for a split second, Johnny saw the recognition in his face. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the same fear that echoed in the other's eyes. Johnny took a slow, deliberate step forward, his voice soft and calm as he knelt down to their level. The children flinched slightly, but none of them ran. They remained huddled together, staring at him with wide eyes, unsure whether he was a friend or another threat. Johnny knew that right now, his every move had to be gentle. He couldn't scare them more than they already were. "I'm here to help," he said softly, his voice reassuring but firm. He didn't want to appear like a stranger, and he certainly didn't want to appear threatening. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." The children stayed silent, their eyes darting between each other. The room felt colder, and the weight of their fear hung in the air like a thick fog. Johnny's heart ached for them. These were kids who should have been at home, playing or laughing, not hiding in the dark, cold shadows of an abandoned building. The little girl, the one who had led him here, looked up at him from where she sat, clutching her stuffed bunny even tighter. She was trembling, but her eyes, despite their fear, seemed to hold a sense of trust. She leaned in closer to Johnny, whispering in his ear with a voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "Don't tell the bad man," she whispered, her words shaky. Johnny's throat tightened at the mention of the bad man, but he nodded gently, assuring her that he wouldn't say anything that would put her in danger. He reached out cautiously, giving her the space she needed while offering his calm presence. "I won't tell anyone," Johnny promised, his voice steady, "but I need to know, who is this man? Why are you hiding?" The older boy, who had been watching him with a wary gaze, spoke up. His voice was low, but there was a quiet strength in it. "He told us he'd help us," the boy explained, glancing nervously at the others. "He said he would take care of us. He said we could stay with him, get food and a place to sleep." Johnny felt his gut twist. He had seen this story before, people pretending to help, only to take advantage of those in need. He gently motioned for the boy to continue. "He was nice at first," the boy went on, his voice cracking slightly. "He gave us food, clothes and said we could stay in a safe place. But then he started asking for things we didn't want to give. Things we didn't understand." The little girl shifted uncomfortably, her eyes dropping to the floor, as if reliving a memory she couldn't escape. Johnny could see the weight of her fear, the shadows of past hurt that still lingered. He could feel the anger rising in his chest, but he held it back, focusing on the kids in front of him. "We ran away," the older boy said, his voice determined despite the fear. "He heard us. We had to get away. We had to." Johnny nodded, his heart breaking for them. "And the little one? She came back for food." The boy's gaze softened for a moment, as he looked at the girl. "Yeah," he said, his voice gentle now. "She snuck out to find food. She didn't want to get caught. She just wanted to bring something back so we wouldn't starve." Johnny felt a lump in his throat. The courage of this little girl, despite her fear, was something he couldn't ignore. She had been so brave, risking everything just to help the others. "Thank you for being brave," Johnny said softly, giving the girl a reassuring smile. "You're safe now, I promise." The little girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and relief. For the first time since he'd found her, she allowed herself to relax slightly, her grip on the stuffed bunny loosening just a little. Johnny's mind raced as he stood in the dimly lit room with the frightened children. He needed to act quickly, but he also needed to make sure they stayed safe. Without wasting another second, he pulled out his phone and quietly dialed a number he knew by heart, a trusted friend from his security team, someone who could handle a situation like this without drawing attention. "Hey, it's Johnny," he said, keeping his voice as steady as possible. "I need you to come here. I've found a group of kids. They're in danger, and we need to get them out quietly. Can you bring some backup? But keep it low-key. No sirens. Just come quickly." His friend agreed, assuring him they would be there as soon as possible. Johnny ended the call and looked around the room. The children were still huddled together, but there was an air of relief beginning to settle. They were safe for now, but he knew that wouldn't last long. The man who had hurt them would likely come looking for them, and Johnny had no doubt that the man would do whatever it took to keep his dark secret intact. As if on cue, Johnny heard footsteps approaching outside. His heart stopped for a moment, and he motioned for the kids to stay quiet, pressing his finger to his lips. The man in the hoodie was here. He had come back. Johnny's pulse quickened. He quickly led the kids to a dark corner of the room, pushing them behind an old bookshelf. He crouched down beside them, whispering, "Stay here, and stay quiet. I'll make sure you're safe." The kids nodded, their eyes wide with fear as they watched Johnny move to the door, taking slow, careful steps. He had to keep the man distracted long enough for his friend and the police to arrive. This was a dangerous game, but there was no other choice. Johnny was their only hope. The door creaked as he opened it, just a crack. He saw the man in the hoodie standing in the alley, his eyes scanning the building. Johnny stepped out, pretending to be lost, his hands raised slightly in a show of submission. "Hey," Johnny called out, trying to sound casual but keeping his voice low. I think I took a wrong turn. Can you help me find my way back to the main road? The man turned, his eyes narrowing as he looked Johnny up and down. Something in his expression shifted. Johnny could see the suspicion forming. The man didn't answer at first, just stared at Johnny for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, without warning, he reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a knife. Johnny's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. He had to buy time, and he had to do it carefully. I'm just looking for the main street, Johnny said, his voice still calm, though inside, his pulse raced. He took a step back, pretending to feel uneasy, trying to keep the man distracted just a little longer. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. The man stepped closer, eyeing Johnny suspiciously. You're not from around here, are you? He asked in a low, dangerous tone. The blade gleamed in the weak light. What are you really doing here? Johnny took another step back, his mind working quickly. He needed to keep the man's attention on him, away from the kids. I really don't want any trouble, Johnny said, his voice firm but non-threatening. I was just looking for a place to get some rest. I wasn't expecting. Before Johnny could finish, the man lunged forward, the knife aimed at him. Johnny dodged just in time, backing up into the doorway of the building. He moved fast, his heart pounding in his chest, but he knew he had to keep the man off balance. With a quick sidestep, he knocked over an old wooden crate, making a loud noise to distract the man. The man's attention shifted for a split second, and that was all Johnny needed. In that moment, his friend and a couple of officers from the local police force rounded the corner, entering the alley silently. They moved fast, surrounding the man before he even had a chance to react. The man tried to fight back, but it was too late. One of the officers grabbed his arm, pulling the knife from his hand, while Johnny's friend secured his other arm. Johnny stepped back, breathing a sigh of relief. The kids were safe, the man was arrested, and the nightmare was finally over. As the officers cuffed the man and led him away, Johnny turned back to the kids, who had quietly emerged from their hiding place. Their eyes were wide, but now there was a flicker of hope in them. It's over, Johnny said softly, his voice filled with relief. You're going to be okay now. Once the man was in custody, and the immediate danger had passed, Johnny stayed with the children. The police escorted them to a safe, secure location, a community center, that had a special program for kids who had been through traumatic experiences. Johnny made sure they were all settled in, ensuring they had food, clean clothes, and blankets to keep them warm. The children were still in shock, their bodies stiff, and their eyes wide, but there was a slight sense of relief in the air. The fear that had clung to them like a shadow began to lift. Johnny watched as the staff took care of the kids, talking to them softly, providing them with snacks and drinks, and gently coaxing smiles from them. The little girl, who had led him to this place, finally found a moment to look up at him. Her eyes, which had been clouded with fear, now shone with something different, a quiet gratitude. She shuffled up to Johnny, her stuffed bunny still clutched tightly in her small hands. Without saying a word, she reached up and gently took his hand. Johnny looked down at her, a warm smile spreading across his face. You're safe now, he whispered. The little girl's lips trembled for a moment, and then she smiled, a smile that was small but sincere. Thank you, she whispered back, her voice barely above a breath. Johnny's heart swelled with emotion. He gently squeezed her hand, his own words caught in his throat. There was nothing he could say that would make up for the fear and pain she'd experienced, but at least in this moment, he had given her something she hadn't had before, hope. As the night went on, the kids began to settle down, their fears slowly replaced by the warmth and comfort of being in a safe place. Johnny stayed by their side, making sure they knew they were not alone anymore. A few days later, the story of Johnny's quiet heroism began to spread. It wasn't long before a news article leaked online, detailing how a well-known actor had secretly stepped in to help a group of runaway kids in danger. The story went viral, with headlines praising his bravery and kindness. People from all over the world flooded social media with messages of love and respect for the actor who had risked everything to help strangers in need. But Johnny never said a word to the media. He didn't seek recognition or attention. In fact, he kept a low profile, continuing with his life as quietly as before. To him, The only thing that mattered was the safety of those children. Their well-being, their peace of mind, was all that truly mattered. While the world applauded his actions, Johnny quietly returned to his routine, never looking for the spotlight. It wasn't about the praise or the accolades. It was about making sure those kids had a chance at a better life. And somewhere, in a warm, safe bed, a little girl slept peacefully for the first time in what felt like forever. Her stuffed bunny lay by her side, and her dreams were no longer filled with fear. She had been lost, but someone had cared enough to follow her, to make sure she wasn't alone. And that, Johnny thought, was all that really mattered. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of kindness and courage. Johnny Depp's quiet heroism reminds us that sometimes the smallest actions can make the biggest difference in someone's life. We hope this story touched your heart as much as it did ours. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, comment, and share it with your friends and family. And if you want to see more heartwarming stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel for all the latest updates. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more powerful emotional stories with you. Stay kind, stay safe, and remember, sometimes it only takes one person to change everything.